Welcome back to the show. This is David Yannis. We're here at the NRB 2014 with my good friend William Federer.
David, great to be with you.
He is brother to the tennis player Federer. No, I'm playing.
Roger Federer is great.
Roger, but this is like what, our third time?
Yes.
Third time we've been together at one of the shows, ICRS, NRB. I think so. Yeah, it's our third time. So that's amazing. That's what I was asking him before we started. What do you want to talk about? So what's been going on new? I mean, you just released the new DVD.
Right. It's a DVD called Islamic Conquest, Past and Present, and it covers the 1,400-year history of Islamic expansion.
Wow.
And so Muhammad, he dies in 632 AD, but he had transitioned from being a religious leader to being a political leader to being a military leader. And Muhammad fought in 66 battles and raids. He even used the catapult when he attacked a city called Al-Taif. And when he was told the catapult was killing innocent women and children, his response was, they are among them. So they got to be killed too. So suicide bombers today think it's okay to kill innocent women and children to advance Islam because Muhammad did. And since he's the perfect Muslim, Muslims that want to more fundamentally follow his example, they follow him religiously, politically, and militarily. And so then the 1,400 years of Islam, they invade into Egypt. People forget Egypt was Christian, evangelized by Mark that wrote the Gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, until Amir ibn Alas invaded in 642 AD. Jerusalem had been a Byzantine Christian city since Constantine, until Caliph Umar conquered it. Syria was the first country to completely be Christian, evangelized by the Apostle Paul.
Okay.
And Antioch, Syria, is where the name Christian was invented. The name Christian was invented in Syria. And then there used to be, until the Muslims invaded, right? And then there used to be 250 Catholic dioceses along North Africa in the 7th century. Now this is 8 centuries before the Reformation.
Yeah.
And the Muslims wiped them out in one generation. Then the Muslims invaded Spain, and in 10 years they conquered all of Spain because the Muslims were on Arabian horses with stirrups and scimitar swords. Spaniards were still fighting on foot. Then the Muslims crossed the Pyrenees Mountains, conquered southern France, carrying away tens of thousands into slavery. And they were
French descents, right?
Yeah, they captured southern France, and finally they were stopped by Charles Martel, the grandfather of Charlemagne, in the year 732 AD, exactly 100 years after the death of Muhammad in 632 AD. They go from Arabia to Paris in 100 years. It is a military campaign. Had Charles Martel not stopped the Muslims outside of Paris, all of Europe would have been conquered because Charles Martel had the only army, right?
Oh my goodness.
And so Spanish, English, German, French, those languages would have never developed. We would be speaking Arabic right now.
And what year was that again?
732 AD.
Wow.
And the Muslims in 846 AD, 10,000 Muslims invade Rome and trash the bones of St. Peter and St. Paul. It was after that the Pope decided to build a wall around the Vatican. And then the Turks converted to Islam, and they conquered what is today Turkey. Back then it was the Greek Byzantine Roman Empire. It was all 7 churches mentioned in the book of Revelation were there. They were all wiped out by the Muslims. The Muslims finally conquered Constantinople. Of course, the Greeks begged the West for help. The West sends help. It's called the what? The Crusades, right? When the Crusades end, the Muslims pick up and they surround Constantinople in the year 1453. And when Constantinople falls, it ends the land trade routes to get from Europe to India and China.
Wow.
People forget Marco Polo in 1271 went from Venice, Italy to China, worked for 17 years for Kublai Khan, brought back spaghetti, coal, gunpowder, talked about the Chinese inventing paper currency, right? And unfortunately, they printed too much of it and helped the empire to collapse. But nevertheless, when the Muslims conquered the trade routes and caravans and sacked Constantinople, it ended land trade from Europe to India and China, and that was in 1453. What happened 40 years later? 1492, and Columbus, who was from Genoa, Italy, sails for the King and Queen of Spain. Where's he going? He wants to go to India and China, a sea route. Runs into some islands, thinks he's in India, so he names the inhabitants the Indians. Columbus would have never set sail over here if it had not been for a jihad and the Muslims conquering Christian Europe, cutting off the land routes to get to India and China. Anyway, it's a fascinating DVD called Islamic Conquest, Past and
they'll
Present.
get all that information.
Yes.
And it's how many discs? 5 parts?
5 discs. 5 half-hour television programs.
Wow. How long did it take you to produce this?
Well, I do a daily TV show called Faith in History on the TCT network, airs on DirecTV. And so we just took 5 of the shows that I talked about that.
And it's a half-hour show?
Half-hour show.
When did you start doing that? Has it been a while? Or?
Yeah, it's we've recorded over 360 shows. So, and my website is AmericanMinute.com, and on the right-hand column there's the link and you can watch some of the Faith in History programs online.
Oh wow! I love to get some of your half-hour shows on my Rev Media TV platform. There's no cost, and I'd love to put it in the mix of our broadcast.
All right,
we'll talk about that.
We'll make that happen.
Yeah, amen. Yeah. So tell us about also now you have something else that's called Change to Chains.
Right. People say America's the greatest country in the world. I decided to prove it. And so I researched every civilization.
Good man.
I researched every civilization that's ever existed on the planet and found some interesting things. The first human records, human beings writing down human records, appears about 3,000 or 4,000 BC. Sumerian cuneiform on clay tablets, where they take a stick, poke it in clay, and bake it, right?
Yep.
And then in Iraq, Mesopotamia, and then Egyptian hieroglyphics on papyrus, where we get the word paper. And so from 4,000 BC to 2000 AD is 6,000 years, which really isn't that long. 6,000 years is just 60 people living 100 years each back to back, right? We're talking 60 grandmas, and you're all the way back to the beginning of recorded human history.
Wow.
Now, the most common form of government in all of history is what? Let's see, there's pharaohs, Caesars, Kaisers, Sultans, Tsars, Maharaja, Genghis Khan, Julius Caesar, Attila the Hun. It's monarchy. That power gravitates into the hands of one person, right? Now, I believe that goes back to the fall in the garden, selfishness coming into the human DNA, Cain killing Abel. And so you put some babies in a playpen, one of them will take the rattle from the rest. You put some kids on a playground, one of them winds up being the bully hogging the ball, drop them in the woods. One of them's an Indian chief, drop them in an inner city. One of them's the gang leader. So the norm, the gravitational pulls for power to get, it's like the Lord of the Rings. Everyone wants that ring of power. So death is a blessing. So at least, Genghis Khan dies. I mean, he kills 30 million people and you can start all over again. And if you're friends with the king, you're more equal. You're not friends with the king, you're less equal. You're an enemy of the king, you're dead. It's called treason. So for most of world history, equality was how close of an orbit can you get to the king. What's rare in history is people getting a chance to experiment and rule themselves without a king. And the first nation to rule itself without a king was Israel. When they come out of Egypt for a couple hundred years, they don't have a king. Everyone's equal before the law. But finally, they get King Saul. And then I go through Athens. I go through the Roman Republic till Caesar usurps power, makes himself dictator for life. And I get up to the most powerful king that planet Earth had ever seen was the King of England. 13 million square miles, 500 million people. The sun never set on the British Empire. And power was concentrated. The king was the head of the church. And America wanted to run in the opposite direction. We took the power of a king, separated it into 3 branches, separated it federal to state level, tied up this federal Frankenstein with 10 handcuffs. All the Constitution really is a bunch of hurdles to prevent power from snapping back into the hands of a dictator.
Yes.
Unfortunately, after every crisis, power wants to concentrate. So I go through the history there. But it's a fascinating book called Change to Change, the 6,000-year quest for global control.
And real quickly, you got a couple of minutes. Tell us about America's God and Country.
Well, this is like a Bartlett's book of quotations, only it's famous Americans, and they are God and country quotations. So Abigail Adams to Booker T. Washington, and it's real easy to use, and it's just a great resource of God and country quotes.
Amen. Tell them your website information, how to get a hold of you.
It's AmericanMinute.com, AmericanMinute.com. I send out a free daily email called the American Minute.
I enjoy them.
And so you can get those, read them, and also you can order any books or watch those Faith and History programs.
They can subscribe for that on your website.
Yes.
The American Minute.
Yes, and it's free, so great.
It's good. It's good. It keeps you abreast of what's going on now, what's gone on in the past. It gives you a lot of good insight of everything. And I enjoy it. Thank you so much for being a part of the broadcast.
Well, thank you, David. It's always an honor.
Awesome. And they can get these two at your website?
Right, AmericanMinute.com.
And also in the bookstores?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, we'll be back with another great guest.